Thank you so much for joining me
Sure.
today. So I'd like to get us started by having you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your role here at the University of Michigan.
Sure. I'm Kara Gavin. I'm in the Department of Communication for Michigan Medicine, which is the academic medical center of the university and includes the medical school. I also have a role with the university's Institute for Healthcare Policy and Innovation, IHPI, which is a relatively recent addition to the university and studies and brings together about 500 researchers who study healthcare and health policy. So, in that role, both of my roles, I find and tell stories from the research that the university's researchers are doing and get them out to the world. But I also act as an intake point for reporters to call when they need an expert on something that they hope to do a story about. And I am one of about a dozen folks from around the university who do this kind of thing. And we all specialize in different areas. And I think that we're all trying to bring the expertise and the new knowledge that this university is creating out to the world, and also help reporters who are increasingly time-strapped and to find experts quickly for topics that they're trying to cover.
Absolutely. So you just practically answered my next question, but I'd like you to go sort of a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
So you just talked a little bit about the role that you play. Can you tell me a little bit about why that role is important?
So I think that, I've been doing this for quite a while, and I think that universities have realized that, especially public universities, that they need to engage with the public and be able to share what they're doing because of the public funding that we receive.
Absolutely.
And because of the public trust that we are here to serve. And the idea that university researchers are busy people, they're people with very specialized knowledge and a lot of demands on their time, and that having communicators like myself in place to act as that go-between, act as that translator, helps make sure that it happens more often, more efficiently, to have the expertise and the research from the university reach the general public, reach policymakers, reach anyone who might be able to use it in their own research, other peers who, you can't read every journal every day in whatever field you're in, but if you see something that's been the product of a communications office at a university crosses your transom through some trade publication you subscribe to, you might say, oh, they're working on that at Michigan. I need to use that and cite that in my own work. So it adds to and augments the scientific publishing process and the typical conference-based dialogues that happen.
Yeah.
It's a way of having the university reach other parts of the world it doesn't normally reach, but also augment what it's already doing to reach the scientific and academic community.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So you touched on this a little bit, but I want to ask the question a little bit more directly. So you talked about interacting with general publics, you've talked about interacting with scientists, you've talked about interacting to some degree with legislators. So can you talk a little bit about what interacting with each of those specific three audiences is like and why it's different? Like, why are they different from each other?
Right. So I think that the general public, obviously, there's a lot of people in America and around the world who are interested in science and medicine, but who didn't study it, didn't go into a field that specializes in it, but who are inherently curious about it. And so we're serving that curiosity and that hunger for new information, whether it's to help them understand things about their own bodies or their health or how their children, they should be protecting their children's health, or about their insurance or about the technology they use or the environment they live in. So it's a way of reaching people who are curious and hungry for information, and frankly, in the world of social media, might share that with other people.
Sure.
So it's a way of leveraging those curious people, those interested people, or the U of M alum who just likes to hear about what's going on at U of M, and leverage their ability to act as a messenger for us and to keep this information flowing outward. Interacting with researchers and them as an audience, certainly I will find that when I'm interacting with researchers one-on-one and doing stories with them, they don't always understand, the communications process. So there's a lot of education of how this works and what the modern landscape looks like with not only working with reporters, but working with social media and getting stories out there. And also this need to think about their peers when we're communicating publicly, that their peers might see what we do, and so it may be that that drives their reluctance to engage on this way. But we try and say, you know what, if we do this right, if we say things in a way that's accurate as well as publicly understandable, you'll still be able to hold your head high among your peers, but we will have served this broader interest as well.
Absolutely.
And then legislators, lawmakers, advocates, nonprofits, foundations, they're very much interested in the products of university research to inform what they're doing and to say, here are some new facts generated, here are some new knowledge generated by independent, objective, hopefully nonpartisan university researchers that we can use in our work. And the university is obviously interested in engaging with lawmakers when they're making policy that could be informed by the expertise of our faculty. And the way we often reach those folks is by sharing things with lawmakers and their staff that is written in language that frankly can be understood by the general public, because most legislative staff do not have specialized training in science and medicine, just as most reporters don't.
You touched on 3 different kinds of goals for 3 different types of audiences. So to sort of shift gears for just a minute, now you as a communicator, can you talk about how you meet those goals and how you set your communication goals when you're interacting with these audiences?
Sure. So certainly when I'm interacting with a faculty member and we're trying to work together to tell a story, I think that I always want to understand from them what are the things that they would like to achieve. Is it just let's get this out there and share this with the world because it's interesting? Or are there things happening in Washington or Lansing that might be relevant to this? Are there things happening in their field of biomedicine that might be interested in these results because of a current controversy or a current debate? So understanding that context in which their research is going to be published and what goals they might have because of that context is important.
Yep.
With the public, I think it's the idea of I want to shape a story that I would be interested in if I were just happening upon it on Facebook or in the New York Times. I want to, capture the interest of the layperson and say, this is interesting, this is cool, this is something worth sharing. And how do you do that? It has to be in their language. It's preferably got some visuals with it. It's got something that it just appeals to that curious individual and layperson. And with the public policy audience, obviously we need to make sure immediately that we tell them why this is relevant to whatever policy debate might be going on or whatever long-standing societal issue policy can address. And why is this new finding relevant to that?
So that's fascinating. So how did you get into working in this space?
So I knew even in high school that I liked writing and I liked science and I wanted to find a way to combine the two. And I looked for universities that would allow me to do that. And I found the science writing program at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania, which offered one of the first majors in science writing in the country. And went there and toyed for a little while with the idea of maybe going into a scientific career with writing on the side. But my experience in a research lab convinced me that I was more attuned to becoming the writer who talks about science and learns about science and brings it to the public instead of the scientist who is doing the science. I went on to do some graduate studies in journalism at Columbia and did a science writing concentration there, more in the environmental science world. And then I got an internship at Brookhaven National Lab on Long Island where they needed a science writer and learned a lot about high energy and nuclear physics there, but also medicine and addiction especially and environmental science. And so got really interested in how to tell the stories of what was going on at a major national lab that was doing really interesting work, but that had not really told that story very well to the public, even in its area. And that led then to my job at Michigan, and the rest is history.
Yeah, so you've been here for quite a while.
I have.
So very briefly then, what are the rewards and the challenges with working with researchers here at the University of Michigan to translate their findings to the public audiences?
It's incredibly rewarding every day, and no day is the same as the one before, because we have thousands, literally, of faculty doing incredible research on so many different areas, in my case in medicine and health policy and healthcare, but in all the scholarly pursuits they do. The idea that I can basically find and tell stories from any area that I'm assigned to cover, that I have specialized in, and help those faculty members get out to the world by working with them to write things and create things that are written in English that a non-scientist can understand, but also to help them be ready for interactions with reporters or with others that they are going to need to do that themselves. They're going to be their own translator, and sort of doing that preparation work as well, even teaching them how to use Twitter effectively when they go to, a research conference or want to weigh in on an issue that's, all the buzz on Twitter right now.
So now I really want to transition and start talking about audience. And as a public relations person, you're dealing with two different types of audiences, right? So on the one hand, you're dealing with the scientists whose results you're working to translate. And on the other, you're working with the people who you're translating for.
Right.
So can you talk to me a little bit about what it's like to work with both of those groups?
So often also we have another audience, which is the scientists' peers. And the fact that the researchers are very conscious that people in their field are going to probably will see either what we produce or the media coverage that might result from what we produce as a Michigan story going out.
Sure.
And so there's really three audiences. And the public, if you think about the public, there's many facets within that. When I work on things related to the Health Policy Institute, for example, we certainly see lawmakers and their staff and advocacy groups or our issue groups and nonprofits as an audience within an audience. This idea that they have a very special interest in some of these research findings because it will help inform how they advocate or decide how to write policy, for example.
Absolutely.
And so this audience who might be more interested in some of the wonkier ends of research than, say, a general reporter for a local newspaper who's interested in covering sort of news that's interesting to their readership of the general public who just want to know, how should they think about certain health topics, or what should they be doing for prevention, or what should they be understanding about the way health policy could affect them in future. So there's a spectrum of audiences. But I always think about, when we're producing it, certainly thinking about aiming for the person who's coming at it with not much knowledge, but who needs to know this or might be interested to know this. In the case of basic research, I find that a lot of people who are consuming science news are doing it via social media, and they're getting it from, universities, they're getting it from traditional science journalists, but they're also getting it from these sort of news aggregator sites that find interesting stories from around the web. They aren't doing a journalistic thing with them, but they're basically aggregating them and serving them up.
Sure.
So these sites they're scouring the web for interesting science news, and then people follow them on Facebook. And so they're consuming it in all different ways, but it's this science-interested public or health policy-interested public who care about these things just inherently. They're curious, they're interested. Maybe they watch Nova. Maybe they follow Neil deGrasse Tyson on Twitter. Who knows? But they're people who are just interested in learning more and are not in the field of science or medicine or health policy, but are citizens of our country. And they deserve to be able to have access to this information.
Absolutely.
And that's actually a point I like to make when I'm talking with scientists and researchers, which is that you're here at a public university, a publicly funded university. Your research, most of it, especially at the medical school, is funded by public dollars, federal dollars in the most case, in some cases state funded. And so here we are doing research for the public good. That's why they go into research, right? They want to make a difference in the world through their work. But if we don't share it back to the public who helped fund it, is it making all the impact that it could make?
Absolutely.
And we find that whether it's the basic sciences, where it could be 10 years before there's any drug or device based on their work, and we find it in health policy, where there could be a law that includes or refers to their work 2 months from now. It really, the immediacy of the impact doesn't really matter. The idea that we should share, that we as a public university should be sharing with the people who help pay for our research the fruits of our research, or at least the most inherently interesting fruits of the research.
Yeah, so I heard a couple of really interesting threads in there. So one is this intrinsic motivation for why we should communicate about our research. But you also touched on a couple of different audiences and how their specific goals with interacting with science media were different. So along those lines, I'd like to sort of shift gears and then ask, when you, as a media person, as a public relations professional, are thinking about how to interact with your audiences, how do you shape your goals to meet their goals? Like, how do you make those things align?
With the scientists, you mean?
With
or
the
with
scientists, with
anyone?
policymakers, with publics?
Well, certainly, sometimes the researchers aren't sure that they have a goal when they're reaching out to me and saying, hey, I have this paper coming out. I'd like to talk about whether we should do a story. They've just been told, perhaps by their department chair or a colleague, that's a really interesting piece of work. It's going to be in a big journal. Maybe you should call the PR office. And they truly don't know what they're getting into in some cases. But we hope to guide them through that and help them have a good experience of it, and to start off by talking with them about, what have you found? What's the significance of it? What's what do you hope will happen because of this? And sometimes the goal is, let's just tell people we have found this and we're going to be working to find something more about this. And that's just fine. The goal is true just sharing. Sometimes the goal is, we've found this, that this policy made in the past has led to this impact on healthcare today, and we want to continue studying it, but we want people to know that that policy had that impact. Because if we don't share the product of that research on that policy's impact, even if that policy is not going to change anytime soon, or there's already replacements being proposed, the idea that you can share the impact of policy through the research that our independent, objective researchers are doing, free of, we would hope, much advocacy on their part, or partisanship, certainly, that we can share that in an immediate time frame and get that information out there, so that those who are considering perhaps changes to that policy or future directions for that policy can be informed by that. Yeah.
So, for instance, one of the things that comes to mind is the report that University of Michigan researchers had on Healthy Michigan.
Absolutely.
And so is that the type of example that you're talking about?
Exactly. So, back in 2013, 2014, our state expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, called it the Healthy Michigan Plan. And our institute, the Institute for Healthcare Policy and Innovation, won the state contract basically to evaluate what the impact of that expansion was. Here we were potentially offering health insurance to hundreds of thousands more people than had had it before, who had not been qualified financially or socioeconomically to take advantage of state-sponsored, federally sponsored Medicaid insurance. All of a sudden, here they were getting insured. And the state and the federal government had an interest and specifically mandated that there be an evaluation of what happened next.
Absolutely.
So since that time, U of M researchers have been evaluating what happened next. They're doing focus groups, they're doing surveys, they're talking to doctors, they're talking to patients, they're talking to hospitals, they're talking to state, and they're talking to insurers. And the products of that research will start rolling out over the next years.
Yeah.
But already there's been other research that our researchers are doing, modeling what the economic impact has been of that expansion. How many people have been able to have employment because of that, or how many people have been able to work more hours, those kinds of questions. And we don't have answers to all of that, but when they did publish their first report, their first model of what the economic impact likely is, they contacted me and said, this is going to be coming out in a journal. They gave me a fair amount of notice, so I knew it was coming. I could work with them to prepare. So not only could we write an article, a press release, if you will, a story, that we could put out on the day the journal published its article, we could actually tell reporters a couple of days ahead of time. And this is allowed by most journals. Most researchers don't know that.
Yeah.
That you can, if you know the day and time of publication, that you can work ahead of time by a few days with trusted reporters who basically pledge Boy Scout, Girl Scouts honor not to divulge those results publicly, but to work on a story that they can have more time to write, that they can convince their editors to run, and that they can get second voices for or create graphics for. So this embargo period, we could use that with that piece of research. It sort of gives it a little extra oomph with journalists to say, this is a piece of research we think is important. But it also, that advance notice that the researchers gave me, gave us time to prepare some graphics that we could use on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn that we could publish with the story. And so working with them, interviewing them, getting their feedback on what I wrote, which is always in the role of the PR person, not the role of the journalist, but the PR person always gets the sign off of the researchers. And I think that's consolation for people who are nervous about this whole process, is that work with a PR person and you can say, no, I need to sign off on that, or we'll push back on you about certain language. And the PR person may push back on you, the researcher, and say, well, if we say it that way, people aren't going to understand, or that headline won't get as many people to sit up and take notice as if we tweak it this way.
Sure.
So there's a back and forth with the writer, the PR person, and then there's the bringing out the story out into the public view through many different mechanisms. But that study, I would argue, has had more impact because we put some extra emphasis to the communication effort behind it. And it happened at a crucial time that we were able to say, we're going to talk about these findings at a time when our nation was debating the future of healthcare and the Affordable Care Act. So I've seen the data in these papers. There's actually a report and a paper that came out roughly around the same time. And those data have been cited by elected officials, by many different groups, and as being definitive, objective data on this issue that's facing our country.
And so I love it. So I love the way that you articulated how different goals can shift for different audiences, and how one of your roles as a PR person is to try and disentangle which goal is appropriate for which audience.
And also sometimes the main goal, like I said, is sharing. We want to just get it out there and then see what happens. I've had stories that I've written that are 2-3 years old, where I'll get an email from someone who just saw it and wants to reference it in a report or talk to the researcher because they're a journalist doing a story on a related piece of research from somewhere else, and they need an expert, and they know that they found this thing I wrote 3 years ago, and I found their way to that expert because of that. So this idea that things live on in the Google sphere is really an important one as well. That if you've produced a piece of publicly accessible, publicly consumable content in the public domain, which everything we publish from the university, press releases, et cetera, is, that it can be found by people who are seeking information and expertise later.
So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, I'd really like to thank you for sharing your thoughts on audience. I think that you have amazing insights and have had a lot of experience working with a lot of different people. So thank you so much.
Thank you.